We're back with the bonus conversation you'll only see here on CBS News New York. So I'd like to talk to you about the council where this year, because of redistricting, every city council district is up for re-election. So I'm wondering, given the fact that there's been some contentious elections in the past, and Republicans have taken a number of seats in the last election. What are the chances that Republicans can flip some Democratic seats this time around?
Well, I think our first priority is maintaining the 6 Republican seats we have, in addition to the 2 seats that are held by Democrats who caucus with us in the Common Sense Caucus. Those seats really have to be our #1 priority, because even with 8 seats we have now, we've been able to be effective. We've been able to have a significant source of pressure. We've gotten things accomplished like the property tax rebate last year and others. That said, I think we have very good chances of taking a seat in the Bronx. We have a strong candidate backed by the Bronx GOP. She's out there raising money. She's doing a great job. And I think the city council created this seat predominantly of Asian Americans in central Brooklyn, in South Brooklyn really, where we saw Republicans do quite well. We have Lester Chang, who's an assembly member there right now. We have some really great grassroots efforts going underway right now. I think in terms of those 2 seats, we could be up to potentially 10 with the 2 Democrats. I
know you do see a number of people in minority communities, for some reason, switching from Democrat to the Republican Party. Do you see that as a trend?
Yeah, I mean, I went to an event for one of my colleagues who's a Republican, and we had people from a NYCHA housing development actually sitting there registering as Republicans. That's something I've never seen in my political lifetime before. I think people are really frustrated with sort of the veneer that has come off the progressive, star. I think they're seeing the lack of real solutions coming from progressives as a real problem for them in their daily lives, and they're willing to open their eyes and see that there is another party that's speaking perhaps more towards the problems they face.
2 words: public safety. Is that going to be a huge issue?
It's going to be a huge issue until we really reestablish the statistics that we had going back into the Bloomberg administration and even to most of the de Blasio administration. We had a tremendously safe city. I think until we get to that point, public safety still will be the #1 concern of New Yorkers, in addition to sort of the more broader affordability problems.
So what's your take on this dissension among the ranks of the Progressive Caucus, where they used defunding the cops as a so-called litmus test about whether they could be members of the caucus? They lost half their membership. What effect is that going to have on these upcoming elections, and will it be another possibility for you to pick up some seats?
Well, it's like the Beatles breaking up, but no one cares and no one's crying about it. I mean, that's really the unfortunate truth. And if you look at what happened...
Public safety is a big issue.
Right. Well, look at what happened. You had a week of the Progressive Caucus of the Council fighting over what essentially is their bylaws. I mean, this is something you would see out of a high school debate team or the West Side Democratic Club, not really a caucus of legislators. They're supposed to be actually working on solutions for the problems faced by New Yorkers and not worrying about who signed their Bill of Rights or whatever nonsense it is. And I think that's part of the problem. The people who left the Progressive Caucus are certainly left of me. They're Democrats.
But there were people who were worried about getting reelected.
But that's my point. They're also reasonable people. They were the adults in the room. And now the Progressive Caucus is really left with this socialist wing who would rather be advocates. They'd rather spend time on the steps of City Hall with banners and signs than they would inside the chamber, actually working on the meat and potatoes issues like how your garbage is getting picked up, where the rats are going, and why New York City is so darn unaffordable for most people to live in.
But here's the real question. So what effect is this now going to have on getting a budget deal? Because that's the big issue coming up. You know, by the end of June, you have to have a new budget. And with all the new unexpected costs, be it's the migrants or the governor's demand that you have more money for the MTA or other things in the state budget that take money away from New York City, how are you going to come up with a budget agreement when you have all this dissension?
I think it's going to sideline some of the progressives who refuse to bend. And that was the really basis of this fallout. Some people refuse to bend or compromise on anything. Unfortunately, we still haven't found those money trees or Scrooge McDuck's pile of gold. So when we actually start adding up and tallying up how much money we have to spend, a lot of the progressives are going to be disappointed that many of their priorities are not going to come to fruition this year. It's going to be easier for the mayor and for the speaker, I think, to play the more moderate side of the council in order to get the 26 votes that she'll need.
But here's the question. What services do you think are going to have to be cut?
I think we'll see these peg cuts across the agencies, where every agency will have to do a little bit of belt tightening.
Even the NYPD?
You might have to see it. You might have to see it. There's no question that has to be on the table. I mean, we're talking about significant deficit. The state comptroller's estimate came out yesterday, higher than the mayor's estimate of what the deficit will be in the out budget year.
Partially that's because of this, the need for the labor contracts, and the first labor contract with DC 37 was a very generous contract.
Look, it was a good contract. It was a fair contract, I think. But don't forget, I mean, we're also out of date on about 180 or so contracts. I think you're going to see that pattern be baked into what these estimates are of the budget deficits
Except
going forward.
Except for the NYPD, which is saying they don't want pattern bargaining.
The PBA will traditionally go to the PERB board to try to get their settlement. That's what they've done in the past a number of times. Whether it works out for their favor or not, I'm not the one to answer that question. If they stuck to the pattern, it might be beneficial this year, since 3% raises are fairly good.
Yeah, but they also guarantee a minimum wage of $18 an hour, which is a lot higher than the state minimum wage.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for most other unions outside of DC 37, we're not really in that range anyway. So if they're looking at a 3% raise, if not more in some cases, Hank and I were just backstage chit-chatting about this very problem, saying that some of the uniform agencies might even see a larger increase.
So what about the idea of raising the cap on charter schools?
I think, and I spent all of last year criticizing Governor Hochul. You know, so take that for what it is. And I think she's right on this issue. I think former Governor Patterson...
Wait. You think that a Democrat governor is right on the charter?
I think she's pushing to raise the cap. I think she's right on it. I think former Governor Patterson was right on it. I think former Governor Pataki was right on it. You have some of these people who are opposing charter schools, like Jabari Brisport, who went to a $60,000 a year school. Right down the block from his district office, you have a school. I won't even say the name, but I think 33% of the kids in this particular school can do math at grade level. You juxtapose that with the Success Academy just across the street and down the block, where 77% of the kids can do math and do reading, and it's almost immoral. In fact, it is immoral to just have this artificial cap on schools that are performing well.
But the mayor says if that happens, it's going to cost another $1 billion. That's another $1 billion that the city really doesn't have, and will mean more cuts in other agencies. So what do you do?
Well, it's not cutting anyone. If we're using fair student funding, by the way, the formula that the UFT pushed for many years, the funding essentially follows the student. And unfortunately, if their students are fleeing public schools... Yeah, but that's funding that doesn't
go to public schools.
And if the students are leaving the public schools and going to a charter school because the parents are making that choice to give their kids a sound education where they can succeed, I don't see a problem with that. In fact, I think that's the goal of the charter movement. Look, the charter schools have to be, they're accountable. They have to re-up their licenses every couple of years. If they're not performing, they get cut. So I don't see the charter schools as the problem in this equation.
So do you think that the mayor, who's been sort of wishy-washy on both sides of the issue because he likes charter schools on the one hand, but he doesn't like the cost, will end up giving in on the charter cap? Or do you think that the UFT and the teachers union, the principals union, will prevail and prevent the cap from being raised?
Look, I hope he bends on the charter cap and allows this to happen, or supports efforts to allow this to happen. I think really people, if you are out there listening to this and your child is in a zone public school where they're getting a bad education, you really need to contact your state legislatures, your assemblyman, your state senator, whoever they happen to be, and really put the pressure. And maybe it won't affect your child, but the next generation of kids who come through these neighborhoods where these schools are challenged will have a better opportunity.
Okay, Joe, we're going to have to leave it right there. Thank you for joining me.